It starts with a sound, not a gunshot, not a scream. It starts with the soft final thud of dirt on polished wood, a sound that promises peace but delivers only a profound, suffocating silence. That was the sound of my husband Richard being returned to the earth. 45 years we'd shared. 45 years in the grand, silent house in Maple Creek that he'd built for me, or so he said. He called it our sanctuary. I called it my gilded cage. Standing by the grave, I felt the damp Oregon air seep into my bones. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather. My son Ethan stood beside me. His hand rested on my shoulder, but it offered no warmth. It felt like an obligation, a prop, in a scene he was desperate to finish. His touch was cold, distant a stranger's gesture. On his other side was Chloe, his wife. Her face was a perfect sculpture of sorrow, the kind you see in old paintings. Practiced, precise, and utterly devoid of genuine feeling. She looked at the coffin, then at Ethan, then at me, her eyes ticking off boxes on some internal checklist of appropriate funereal behavior. I didn't cry. The well of my tears had run dry decades ago, evaporated by the low, constant heat of Richard's quiet control. He was never a man who shouted. He didn't have to. His disapproval was a change in atmospheric pressure, a tightening in the air that made it hard to breathe. He had engineered our lives with the same meticulous precision he used to design circuit boards for his tech company. Every vacation, every dinner party, every decision was a line of code in the program of our marriage. And I, Elizabeth, was his most complex, most obedient operating system. The real frostbite set in later back at the house. The reception was a blur of black suits, muted sympathies, and the cloying scent of lilies. Our old friend Margaret clutched my hand, her own wrinkled and warm. "Oh, Elizabeth," she whispered, her eyes filled with the honest grief I couldn't muster. 45 years. Such a long time. If you need anything, anything at all. Before I could answer, a shadow fell over us. Chloe. She placed a hand on Ethan's arm, a proprietary gesture I was beginning to recognize. "Ethan, darling," she said, her voice a low, smooth melody that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Margaret's so good of you to come. We just need to borrow Dad for a moment. We're trying to manage the flow of energy in the room." Margaret blinked, confused. "The flow of energy." Chloe smiled, a brief, bright, dismissive flash of teeth. "It's important to maintain a positive, energetic field during times of transition. All this residual grief can be quite toxic." She tugged gently on Ethan's arm, pulling him away from Margaret and me, steering him toward a corner of the room where a few of his and Chloe's younger friends were gathered. I watched them go, a knot tightening in my stomach. Toxic energy. Residual grief. It was a language I didn't understand, but I felt its meaning like a physical blow. It was a warning shot. Later, I was sitting in Richard's armchair, a throne of cracked leather he'd occupied every evening, when Chloe approached me alone. Ethan was across the room, trapped in a conversation with his uncle. "Elizabeth," she began, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. "I know this is a difficult day, but it is also a powerful opportunity." I just looked at her. "An opportunity, my husband's funeral." She seemed to take my silence as an invitation to continue. "It's a chance for a clean slate. For Ethan, especially. To release old patterns. To declutter not just the house, but his emotional landscape." She gestured vaguely around the living room, her eyes lingering on the shelves of Richard's books, the photos of our family on the mantelpiece. A fresh start. Her words hung in the air, cold and sterile. A clean slate. It sounded less like a comfort and more like a threat. A threat to erase the 45 years I had lived in that house. To erase me. I saw Ethan glance over, a flicker of something guilt, anxiety in his eyes, before Chloe turned and smiled at him, and he immediately looked away. The cold weight of his hand at the cemetery suddenly made sense. It wasn't comfort. It was the first act of letting go. The reception ended. The last of the sympathetic neighbours and bewildered old friends departed, leaving behind a house that felt both emptier and more crowded than ever before. The silence that descended wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, watchful. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first volley has been fired. I was alone in my home with my son, and a woman who spoke of my life as something to be decluttered. The thud of dirt on the coffin had not been an ending. It was a starting pistol. The days that followed were a slow, methodical dismantling of my world. The siege began not with a battering ram, but with the quiet, almost polite removal of a photograph. I came downstairs one morning, a few days after the funeral, seeking the familiar comfort of a morning cup of tea. The silence of the house was different now. It used to be Richard S. silence, a heavy blanket of his presence. Now it was an empty, echoing silence, punctuated by the whisper of Chloe's slippers on the hardwood floors. On the wall of the main hallway, there had always been a gallery of family photos. Ethan's first steps. His high school graduation awkward in his cap and gown. Our trip to the coast with our granddaughter Maya, then just a little girl laughing on my lap. These weren't just pictures. They were my anchor points, the visible proof of a life lived. That morning, the wall was bare, stark white and empty. The nail holes were still there like tiny weeping wounds. I stood there for a full minute, my hand on the banister, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. In the living room, propped against the sofa, were 3 large canvases. They were art, I suppose. Minimalist. One was a single black line on a white background. Another was a grey square. The third was just beige. A vast, empty expanse of beige. Chloe emerged from the kitchen holding a green smoothie. She saw me looking at the wall and smiled that same bright, empty smile. "Good morning, Elizabeth. I hope you slept well. We're just starting the process of reclaiming the space." Reclaiming. The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Chloe, where are the photographs?" "Oh, they're safe," she said breezily, taking a sip of her smoothie. I packed them away carefully. It's part of our energetic hygiene. We need to create a neutral environment, free from the weight of past attachments. It's essential for Ethan's healing. Every word was a perfectly polished stone, smooth and cold, and designed to be unanswerable. Energetic hygiene. Past attachments. It was like she was speaking a different language, a dialect of pop psychology I was meant to find intimidating. "My son's healing," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Healing from what?" "From the accumulated trauma of his upbringing, of course," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "This house is a container for a lot of complicated energy. Richard S. passing has brought it all to the surface. We need to clear it out to make space for intentional living." I looked past her, searching for Ethan. He was standing in the doorway to the dining room, holding his phone, pretending to be engrossed in something on the screen. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ethan," I said, my voice pleading. "Our family photos?" He finally looked up, his expression strained. "Mum, Chloe's right. We talked about it. It's for the best. It's just temporary. To help us all move forward." He recited the words like a child who had memorized a difficult passage for a school play. The life was gone from them. They were Chloe S. words, coming from his mouth. "Move forward from what, Ethan? From your own life." Chloe stepped between us, a serene smile fixed on her face. "Now, Elizabeth, let's not frame this as an attack. This is an act of love. We are creating healthier boundaries. It's something my therapist, Dr. Finch, is very clear about. Strong boundaries are the foundation of self-actualization. Boundaries. That was the word they used to build the walls. The next day, the boundaries became physical. Chloe caught me as I was about to enter the formal living room, the one with the fireplace and the good china. "Elizabeth," she said, stopping me with a perfectly manicured hand, held up, not touching me, but creating an invisible barrier. "I think it would be best if we designated this as a quiet space for Ethan and me, for meditation and our sessions. Your presence, and I mean this with all the love in the world, carries a very specific maternal energy that can be disruptive to the work we're doing. The work, the constant, vague, ominous work. The work I asked my voice dangerously level. Chloe, this is my home. I have lived here for 45 years. And we honor that," she said, nodding sagely. "We honor your history in this house. But the present needs to be our focus. For Ethan S.'s sake. He needs a space free from the echoes of the past." She suggested with the same infuriating calm that my activities be confined to my bedroom suite and the back garden. "You have your lovely roses," she'd said, as if that were a fair trade for the rest of my own house. I looked at Ethan, who was standing right behind her, his face a mask of pained neutrality. He just gave a small, helpless shrug. He was gone. My son, the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and tangled kite strings, was gone. In his place was this hollow man, a ventriloquist's dummy for his wife's bizarre ideology. The final turn of the screw came not in person, but through the cold, impersonal glow of my phone screen. A notification pinged. It was from a new app they had insisted I install, called Family Harmony. A message from Chloe appeared. "Hi, Elizabeth. To help us all coordinate and respect each other's space and energy, we've created a schedule on the app. Please check it for your approved kitchen usage times. This will help us avoid any potential friction and ensure Ethan's environment remains stable. Thanks for your cooperation." I tapped on the notification. There it was, a calendar, a color-coded schedule for my own kitchen. Elizabeth Kitchen Access, 8:00 a.m., 8:30 a.m., 12:30 p.m., 1:00 p.m., 6:00 p.m., 6:30 p.m. My life in my own home was now bracketed into 30-minute slots. I felt a surge of hot, raw fury so intense it made me dizzy. I wanted to storm out of my room, to scream, to throw the beige canvas against the wall, to tell them this was not a wellness retreat. It was a prison. But the fury was quickly doused by a cold wave of something else. Fear. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It wasn't just a daughter-in-law I didn't like. This was systematic. It was strategic. Every move was calculated, every word a piece of jargon designed to disarm and confuse me. The removal of photos, the annexing of rooms, the scheduling of my basic needs. It was a siege. A quiet, psychological siege, designed to make me a ghost in my own life. They weren't just isolating me. They were trying to erase me one polite, boundary-setting, energetically hygienic step at a time. I sat on my bed, staring at the schedule on my phone, and for the first time since Richard's death, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Not of grief for him, but of terror for myself. The nights were the worst. The house, once a familiar landscape, was now alien territory. I'd lie awake in my bed, listening. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind in the great oak outside my window. These were once comforting sounds. Now they felt like the secret communications of an enemy force. During the day, I could retreat to my garden, my hands in the soil, the thorns of the rose bushes, a welcome, honest kind of pain. But at night, the walls of my bedroom felt like they were closing in. Richard had been obsessed with the future. Not in a hopeful way, but in a controlling one. He wanted to automate, to streamline, to eliminate the messy unpredictability of human life. Our house was his laboratory. He called it his smart house, but it always felt more like a sentient one, constantly watching, listening, reporting. The lights, the temperature, the security system, the music. Everything was connected to a central hub he had designed himself, a sleek black cylinder in his office that he had named Aura. It stands for Automated Residential Universal Assistant, he'd explained once, beaming with pride. She's the brain of the house, Elizabeth. She makes everything seamless. Seamless. That was Richard's favorite word. For him, it meant efficient. For me, it meant there was nowhere to hide. Aura was always on its microphone arrays, embedded discreetly in the ceilings of every major room. It was always listening for its wake word. I had mostly ignored it, finding it unsettling. I preferred the solid, reliable click of a light switch to a disembodied voice confirming my commands. One night, about 2 weeks into the siege, the silence in the house was particularly loud. It was nearly 2 a.m. Sleep was a distant country I couldn't find the passport for. I was thirsty, but my scheduled kitchen access had expired hours ago. The thought of tiptoeing down the hall, of potentially running into Chloe on some late-night quest for energetic alignment, filled me with a weary dread. So I stayed put, my throat dry, my mind racing. I stared at the ceiling at the small circular grill where I knew one of Aura's microphones was hidden. Loneliness is a strange and desperate thing. On a whim, a quiet act of rebellion against the oppressive silence, I decided to ask for some music. Aura, I said, my voice raspy from disuse. A soft blue light pulsed from the smoke detector. I am here, the system's calm female voice responded. Play some music? Classical. There was a pause. Then the voice said something unexpected. I may have misheard. My last registered function was an internal diagnostic. I am currently accessing recent voice activity logs. Is that correct? I frowned. It was a glitch, surely. Richard S. system wasn't perfect, a fact that always infuriated him. No Aura. Play music. Chopin. Accessing recent voice activity logs, it repeated its tone, unchanged. A list appeared on the small screen of the control panel by my bed, the one Richard had insisted I have. It was a log, a time-stamped list of every command and conversation the system had picked up. Curiosity sharp and sudden pierced through my loneliness. I sat up, pulling on my reading glasses. My finger hovered over the screen. This felt like an intrusion, a violation of the very privacy Chloe and Ethan claimed to be championing with their boundaries. But they had violated my life so thoroughly, so methodically, that my own sense of propriety felt like a foolish, outdated luxury. I touched the screen. I started to scroll. Most of it was mundane. Aura, what's the weather? Ethan's voice. Aura, add kale to the shopping list. Chloe's voice. Aura, set a timer for 20 minutes. Chloe again, likely for one of her meditations. I scrolled back, day by day. The entries were a diary of my own erasure. Their voices, their needs, their schedules filling the digital space of the home as they filled the physical one. I scrolled back further, a cold feeling creeping up my spine. I scrolled back to the day of the funeral. The log was filled with entries from that evening, after the last of the guests had left, after I had retreated to my room, exhausted and numb. Most were from the living room. I saw an entry time-stamped 11:04 p.m. The source was listed as Living Room Array. The speaker was identified as Chloe. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the play icon. This was wrong. It was eavesdropping. But then I remembered the bare wall where my family S faces used to be the humiliating schedule for my own kitchen. My hesitation evaporated. I pressed play. Chloe S. voice filled the silent bedroom, but it was different from her usual serene, melodic tone. It was low, urgent, stripped of its wellness guru polish. It was the voice of a predator. Have to be patient with him, he is still processing. But the first session was a complete success. We established the core narrative of his maternal trauma. There was a pause, then Ethan S. voice, tired and muffled. I don't know Chloe. She says my mom. It feels drastic. Drastic, is what S required. Ethan Chloe S. voice snapped back, sharp and cold. Dr. Finch says the final severance needs to be handled with absolute precision. We can't afford any sentimentality now. It would compromise the entire process. Think of it as a spiritual surgery. It is painful, yes, but necessary for you to heal. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed pause, my finger trembling. Final severance. The phrase echoed in my mind. It sounded so corporate, so final. My mind, conditioned by 45 years with a businessman, immediately went to finances. Richard's company. He must have left some complicated business dealings, some partnership that needed dissolving. A severance package. Of course. Ethan was now in charge of the estate. Chloe, with her obsession with clearing things out, was probably pushing him to settle Richard S. affairs quickly, to cut ties with some old business partner. The maternal trauma, talk, the spiritual surgery. That was just Chloe's way of framing everything. She was couching a simple financial transaction in her bizarre therapeutic language to manipulate Ethan into acting decisively. A wave of relief washed over me so potent it left me weak. It was just about money. It was cold and ruthless, but it wasn't personal. It wasn't about me. It was about Richard S. legacy, something I had long felt detached from anyway. They weren't trying to erase me. They were just trying to clean up a financial mess left behind by my husband. The thought was strangely comforting. The alternative was too monstrous to contemplate. I took a deep breath, the knot of fear in my chest loosening its grip. I was being paranoid. I was a grieving widow, isolated and stressed, reading malice into what was probably just a clumsy, insensitive handling of an inheritance. I lay back against my pillows, the recording forgotten. I told myself I was catastrophizing. I told myself it was just business. I was wrong. I was catastrophically, apocalyptically wrong. It wasn't about severing ties with a business partner. The person they were planning to sever from was me. That phrase, final severance. It wasn't just a strange choice of words. It was a splinter under my skin. It burrowed deep. In the quiet of that hollowed-out house, with the ghosts of 45 years swirling in the dust motes, that phrase became my obsession. The nights were the worst. Sleep was a stranger. So I found a new ritual. After I was sure they were asleep, after the low hum of their white noise machine started up from behind their closed bedroom door, I would creep out into the living room. The Ayura hub was a sleek black cylinder on the mantelpiece, Richard's last monument to a connected life. My hands would tremble the first few times I touched the screen. I felt like a thief in my own home. I learned its secrets. The system logs tucked away in a submenu labeled Diagnostics, and inside that, Voice Activation History. It was a library of whispers. I taught myself to filter the recordings, by room, by time of day. Most of it was garbage. Aura, mishearing a command, activating when the television was on, catching snippets of a news report or a commercial jingle. But I was patient. I listened to the house breathe. I heard Chloe on the phone with a caterer, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I heard Ethan sighing as he scrolled through his phone, a sound of profound, bottomless exhaustion. I pieced together the fragments, the stray words, the overheard half-conversations. It was like assembling a puzzle in the dark, and the image taking shape was monstrous. One night, I found a recording from the kitchen. Chloe S. voice clipped and impatient. The transfer from his personal account needs to be clean. No flags. A man's voice unfamiliar. It will be structured as a consultation fee. Perfectly standard. My blood ran cold. Was this it? Were they draining Richard's accounts? The thought was ugly, but in a way it was almost a relief. Greed, I understood. Greed was logical, predictable. It was a motive as old as time. I spent 2 more nights convinced that was the answer, that the final severance was about severing me from my inheritance. It was a familiar, grubby kind of evil. I could almost live with it. But the puzzle wasn't finished. There were pieces that didn't fit. The talk of energy and boundaries. The way Chloe looked at me, not with avarice, but with a kind of clinical pity, like a scientist observing a specimen whose suffering was necessary for the experiment. The answer, I was clinging to the financial one. It didn't explain the coldness in my own son's eyes. Then I found it. The recording that changed everything. It was from 2 days prior, mid-afternoon. I had been in the garden on my knees, pulling weeds from around my wilting rose bushes. I'd felt exhausted and had come inside to lie down. I must have fallen asleep. They must have thought I was still napping. The recording was logged from my own bedroom. The microphone in the Aura-enabled alarm clock on my nightstand must have activated. First Chloe. Sis' voice low and conspiratorial right there in the room where I slept. He S, hesitating. I can feel it. He S, backsliding. A pause. The rustle of fabric. He still feels the filial obligation. He sees her looking frail, and it triggers the old programming. Then my son's voice. Ethan. It was strained, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. She's my mother, Chloe. Just those 4 words. But in them I heard a lifetime of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and proud applause at school plays. I heard the boy who used to run to me, not from me. For a single stupid heartbeat I felt a surge of hope. He was defending me. He was still in there. Chloe's reply shattered it. Her voice was not sharp. It was not angry. It was worse. It was serene, patient, as if explaining a simple, undeniable truth to a child. No, Ethan. She is your primary trauma source. That is a fact established by Dr. Finch. The person you call mother is a construct of a dysfunctional dynamic. To heal, to become the sovereign self you are meant to be, it is time to divorce your mother. For good. Dr. Finch has the papers ready for the final severance. Divorce me. The word hung in the silence of the living room in the dead of night. It didn't compute. It was an error message in my soul. You divorce a spouse. You don't divorce a parent. The concept was so alien, so profoundly wrong, it was like hearing that the sky was green or that water was dry. My brain short-circuited. For a long moment, I just sat there on the cold floor, the tablet in my lap, staring at the glowing blue line of the audio file. My heart wasn't erasing. It had stopped. The world had tilted on its axis and I was sliding off. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about putting me in a home. It was about something so much more fundamental, so much more insane. They were planning to unmake me, to legally, psychologically erase my existence as Ethan S. mother. The true, surreal, nightmarish nature of the threat finally began to dawn, not like a sunrise, but like the slow, cold creep of a killing frost. I couldn't breathe. My hands felt numb, my whole body disconnected. I was a ghost listening to the terms of my own exorcism. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was filled with their intent. Every floorboard that wasn't creaking, every door that remained shut, was part of the conspiracy. I was under siege, but the enemy wasn't at the gates. They were inside, walking the halls, drinking coffee from my mugs, planning to declare me a non-person. Terror is a strange thing. It can paralyze you, but it can also make you preternaturally clear. In that moment of absolute psychic freefall, one name, one face, surfaced from the depths. Maya. My granddaughter. My son, S. daughter. She was my only hope. Maya visited 2 days later. She'd been texting little feelers. Hey, Gram, you okay? House feels weird. Need me to bring you anything she knew? Not the specifics, but she could sense the poison in the air. She was 17, a creature of the digital age, her thumbs a constant blur across her phone screen. She lived a life I barely understood, full of memes and trends and online communities. But beneath that veneer of teenage distraction, Maya had Richard's sharp mind, and thank God my heart. When she arrived, Chloe met her at the door with a smile that was all teeth. Maya, how lovely. Your grandmother is in the garden. Just remember to give her space. She's processing a lot of grief, and we're trying to maintain a low-stress healing environment for her. It was a warning dressed up in the language of wellness. Maya gave her a flat, unimpressed look. Right. A healing environment. Got it. She breezed past Chloe and found me by the sad-looking hydrangeas. She didn't hug me right away. She just stood there, her arms crossed, taking in the slump of my shoulders, the tremor in my hands, as I pretended to prune a perfectly healthy branch. Okay, Gram, she said, her voice low. What's really going on? And don't tell me you're just sad about Grandpa. This is different. The air in here is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ethan looks like a zombie, and Chloe looks like she's about to ascend to a higher plane of existence. Spill. My resolve, so steely in the dead of night, crumbled in the face of her concern. My throat closed up. I couldn't form the words. Divorce your mother? How do you say that to your own granddaughter about her father? How do you explain a sickness that has no name? Instead, I took her hand. It was warm, alive. Come inside, I whispered. There's something I need to show you. I led her to my bedroom, the one place that was still mine, and shut the door. The air still felt tainted from the memory of that recorded conversation. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Maya sat in the armchair, her posture alert, her usual teenage slouch gone. She was all focus. I had spent the last 2 nights transcribing, typing out the fragments from Aura's logs onto a document on my old tablet. My fingers, stiff with arthritis, had ached, but it was a necessary pain. I needed to see the words to make them real, to prove to myself I hadn't lost my mind. I handed the tablet to Maya. Read this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She took it, her brow furrowed with confusion. She started to read. I watched her face. It was like watching a storm gather over a calm sea. First curiosity as she read about the toxic energy and the healthy boundaries. Then a flicker of disbelief as she saw the phrase, final severance. Her eyes darted up to meet mine, a question in them. I just nodded, urging her to keep reading. She scrolled down to the last entry, the one from my bedroom. Her breath hitched. I saw her lips form the words silently as she read them. Primary trauma source. Her expression hardened, the teenage softness melting away, replaced by a sharp, protective anger. Then she reached the final line. It is time to divorce your mother. She looked up from the screen, her face pale. The color had drained from her cheeks. For a moment, she was silent, the words hanging in the air between us. The horror on her face was a perfect mirror of my own. It was a strange, terrible kind of validation. I wasn't a crazy. Divorce. She finally whispered the word, sounding just as absurd and alien from her lips as it had in my head. What the hell does that even mean? I don't know. I said the confession a relief. I think it's exactly what it sounds like. I told her about the man's name. Dr. Finch. Chloe mentioned a Dr. Finch. Maya didn't need to be told twice. The tablet was forgotten on the chair. Her phone was in her hand, a seamless extension of her will. Her thumbs, which had once seemed frivolous to me, now moved with the speed and precision of a surgeon. A furious, silent storm of searching, scrolling, and clicking. The air in the room crackled with a new kind of energy. Not the false, cloying, healing energy of Chloe, but the sharp, focused energy of a hunt, I watched her, this child of a world I barely knew, navigating the digital labyrinth with an instinct I could only marvel at. Her expression shifted again. The initial shock was hardening into something cold and methodical. The horror was still there, but it was now fuel. "Got him," she said, after less than a minute. Her voice was flat, all business. She turned the phone screen towards me. There he was, Dr. Alistair Finch. The face on the screen was handsome in a practiced, predatory way. Silvering hair, a warm, reassuring smile, eyes that seemed to look right through the camera and into the soul of the viewer. He was wearing a soft, expensive-looking sweater posed in a room with a lot of books and what looked like a real fireplace. He projected authority wisdom and a deep, unsettling calm. The banner at the top of the website read, "The Sovereign Self Institute." Below it, a tagline, "Reclaim your narrative. Liberate your life." "What is this?" I asked, leaning closer. "It's a cult," Graham Meyer said, her voice grim. "A high-end internet-age therapy speak cult." She clicked on a video link. Dr. Finch's smooth baritone voice filled my small bedroom. He was pacing a stage, speaking to a rapt audience. For too long, he began, his arms spread wide. "We have been shackled by archaic, sentimental notions of family. We have been told that blood is thicker than water. But I ask you, what if that blood is toxic? What if that water is the only thing that can cleanse you?" The crowd murmured its assent. "The parent-child dyad," he continued, his voice dropping to a confidential, intimate tone, "is often the primary source of our adult dysfunction. Our anxieties, our failures, our inability to achieve our potential. We carry our parents with us, not as sources of love, but as ghosts in our machine. They are the original trauma, the architects of our pain." I felt sick. He was speaking Chloe's language, or rather she was speaking his. Maya navigated to another page on the site. Our programs. There it was listed between narrative deconstruction workshops and ego boundary masterclasses. The flagship program, Familial Severance. "Read this," Maya said, her finger hovering over the description. I took the phone. "Familial severance is not an act of anger," the text read. "It is a radical act of self-love, a formal, quasi-legal process designed to grant you true personal sovereignty. Through a guided therapeutic journey, culminating in the signing of a cessation of familial bonds contract and a final liberation ritual, you can permanently disconnect from the parental figures who are inhibiting your growth. This is not abandonment. This is an upgrade. It is your parental divorce. Parental divorce." There was that word again. Now it had a framework, a sick, commercialized ideology built around it. It was a product, a service he was selling. Liberation for the low, low price of your soul. And thousands of dollars, I was sure. "They're paying him," I whispered. "They're paying this man to teach them how to erase me." Maya kept digging. She found his social media channels. A slick Instagram feed filled with inspirational quotes laid over serene landscapes. A Twitter account spewing psychobabble in 280 characters. And then she found the comments section on his latest YouTube video, a talk titled "The Courage to Disconnect." "Graham, look." She held the phone out again. My own daughter-in-law's face smiled out from a small circular profile picture. Chloe. And beside it, her comment posted just last week. "Dr. Finch, your work is revolutionary. You have given our family the tools to finally heal from decades of ingrained trauma. The final severance can't come soon enough. Thank you for showing us the path to freedom." The breath left my body in a ragged gasp. It was all there. The confirmation. The blueprint for my own destruction. They weren't just trying to put me in a home or steal my money. That would have been simple. This was so much more insidious. They were trying to delete me from their own history, to rewrite their lives as if I had never been a part of it. They wanted to stand at my grave not as grieving children, but as liberated strangers celebrating their sovereignty. The sheer arrogance of it, the cruelty cloaked in the sanctimonious language of healing, was breathtaking. Maya put her phone down. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective light that I hadn't seen since she was a little girl defending a stolen toy in the sandbox. No, she said, her voice low and hard. No way. We are not letting this happen. In that moment, in the wreckage of my world, a tiny, fragile alliance was forged. An old woman with a broken heart and a 17-year-old girl with a smartphone united against the serene, smiling monster on the screen, and his devoted disciples sleeping just down the hall. The next move came sooner than I expected. They were accelerating their timeline. Perhaps Ethan's hesitation had spooked Chloe. Perhaps Dr. Finch had given them a deadline. 3 days after Maya's visit, they called for a family meeting. The phrase itself was a farce. We weren't a family anymore. We were a defendant and 2 prosecutors. They sat me down in the living room, the one they had stripped of all warmth and memory. The family photos were gone, replaced by large canvases of abstract, meaningless shapes. It felt like a corporate boardroom or an interrogation chamber. I sat in my armchair, the one Richard had always favoured. It felt like the only piece of solid ground left. Ethan wouldn't look at me. He stared at a fixed point on the minimalist rug, his jaw tight, his hands clasped between his knees. He was a portrait of misery. Chloe, however, was radiant. She radiated a calm, confident purpose that was terrifying. She placed a handsome, leather-bound folder on the glass coffee table between us. It landed with a soft, final thud. Mom Ethan began, his voice cracking on the first word. He cleared his throat and started again, reciting a line he had clearly rehearsed. Chloe and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about legacy. We need you to sign these. It's just some estate planning paperwork to make things simpler down the line. Liar. My own son lying to my face. The pain of it was a physical blow, but the fear that had consumed me for days was beginning to curdle into something else, a cold, hard anger. I looked from his averted eyes to Chloe's serene, expectant face. She was the ventriloquist. He was the doll. I reached for the folder. My hand was surprisingly steady. I opened it. The paper was thick, creamy, expensive. The text was dense, a wall of legalese designed to intimidate and confuse. But my mind, sharpened by terror and outrage, cut right through it. I didn't need to read every word. The section headers in bold, unforgiving print leaped off the page. Irrevocable relinquishment of parental rights. Cessation of all familial bonds and obligations. Voluntary transfer of full power of attorney, medical and financial, to Ethan and Chloe. Last name. It was all there. A contract for my own unbeing. A document that would legally strip me of my name, my role, my history. It would give them control over everything I owned and everything I was. It was a death warrant, and they wanted me to sign it myself. I looked up from the pages, my gaze landing on Chloe. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She smiled, a gentle, patient smile that made my skin crawl. "It's a therapeutic tool, Elizabeth," she said, using my first name like a weapon. Dr. Finch designed this framework. It's not about punishment. It's about creating a clean break, a formal boundary that will allow Ethan to finally truly heal. It's a gift, really. The gift of letting him go. A gift. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked at my son. "Ethan, is this the gift you want, to have me sign a piece of paper that says, 'I am no longer your mother'?" He flinched. For a second, a flicker of the old Ethan of my boy crossed his face, a flash of agony. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Chloe placed a hand on his knee. A small, proprietary gesture. That was all it took. The mask slammed back down. "It's for the best, Mom," he mumbled to the floor. I closed the folder. The sound was a sharp crack in the silent room. I pushed it back across the glass table. "No," I said. Just that one word. It felt like the first word I had truly spoken in months. It was solid, real, mine. Chloe's smile didn't falter. It just became colder. The manufactured warmth vanished, revealing the steel beneath. "I see," she said, her voice dripping with disappointed pity. "We were afraid of this. Your resistance to his healing. Your inability to decenter yourself from his narrative." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. The gaslighting was so blatant, so audacious, it was almost brilliant. "This right here," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the leather folder. "Your refusal. This is precisely why the severance is necessary. You continue to center your own needs, your own feelings above your son's recovery. You are proving Dr. Finch's entire thesis. By refusing to sign, you are forcing our hand." The emotional manipulation was dizzying. It was a cage of logic built from nonsense. My love was reframed as control, my identity as a burden. My refusal to be erased was presented as the very proof that I deserved to be. I was being told that the only way to prove I loved my son was to agree that I was a poison in his life, and to sign the papers that would legally make me a stranger. I stared at them, at the broken man my son had become, and the smug architect of his ruin, and I felt the last vestiges of my grief and fear burn away, leaving behind something clean and hard and cold. A decision. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a war, and I had just lost the first battle. But I was not, I decided in that sterile, soulless room, going to lose the war. The fog of grief didn't lift. It froze. The weight in my chest, once a heavy, formless sorrow, crystallized into something sharp and cold, a shard of ice where my heart used to be. The tears dried on my face, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. They were the last I would shed for this. The time for weeping was over. The time for war had begun. I sat in Richard's armchair, the leather cool against my skin, the contract lying on the ottoman before me like a venomous snake coiled to strike. The final severance. They had given me a name for my own execution, and they expected me to hold the pen. A strange calm settled over me. Despair, I realized, is a fire that can either consume you or forge you. I felt the heat on my face and made a choice. I would not be the victim in their story. I would be the author of my own. I would play the part they had written for me, but I would write the ending myself. The next morning, Chloe found me in the kitchen, squinting at the contract under the bright fluorescent lights. She had that serene, predatory stillness she mistook for mindfulness. "Good morning, Elizabeth," she said, her voice smooth as river stones. "Have you had a chance to look over the paperwork?" I looked up, letting my eyes go wide and unfocused. I practiced it in the mirror. A touch of confusion, a flicker of fear, the subtle tremor of a hand reaching for a coffee cup. I was a frail old woman. I was a cornered animal. I was a fox. "Oh, Chloe, dear," I began, my voice a little higher, a little more fragile than usual. "I've tried. I truly have. But it's all so much." I tapped a page with a trembling finger. All these legal words. Relinquishment, fiduciary duties. My old brain just can't seem to make sense of it. It swims in front of my eyes. A flicker of impatience crossed her face before being smoothed over with that mask of therapeutic concern. "Of course, Elizabeth. It's a lot to process. That's perfectly normal. Ethan and I are here to help you through it. It's just about securing your future, making sure you're taken care of." My future. I repeated, letting the words hang in the air, tasting like ash. "Yes, of course. It's just, Richard always handled these things. He was so clever. Without him, I let my voice trail off a perfect imitation of a woman lost in a world too complex for her to navigate. That's why we're here, she said, her tone softening with condescension. She was buying it. Every last bit. We're taking on that burden for you. You're such a good girl, Chloe, I said, looking at her with what I hoped passed for misty-eyed gratitude. So good to my Ethan. So good to me. Could you just give me a little more time? A few more days. I want to read it again when my head is clearer. I promise I'll try to understand. She placed a hand on my shoulder. The touch was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a brand. Take all the time you need, she said, her victory assured. This is a big step. We want you to be comfortable. She walked away, her smugness radiating off her like heat. I watched her go, the fragile old woman act, melting away the moment her back was turned. My hand was perfectly steady as I picked up my phone. Maya arrived that afternoon under the pretense of bringing me groceries. She walked into my bedroom, her young face a storm of concern. Grandma, are you okay? You sounded weird on the phone. I closed the door and turned to her, the mask of frailty gone, my eyes hard as flint. I'm not okay, Maya, but I'm not broken either. I laid the contract on my bedspread. They want me to sign this. She picked it up. Maya was a digital native fluent in the complex languages of code and contracts. She read quickly, her brow furrowing her lips, thinning into a hard line. She didn't need to be a lawyer to understand the brutal meaning behind the legalese. No? She whispered, looking from the papers to my face. They can't. This is like a non-person document. They're trying to delete you. That's exactly what they're trying to do, I said, my voice low and steady. And we are not going to let them. Her eyes lit up with a fierce loyalty that warmed the icy corners of my heart. What do we do? You have a scanner on your phone, don't you? For the next hour, my bedroom became a war room. Maya, with the quiet efficiency of a secret agent, scanned every single page, her phone's camera flashing methodically. She converted them into a secure file, her fingers flying across the screen. Who are we sending this to? She asked, her voice hushed with the thrill of conspiracy. A ghost, I said. A man from a time when a handshake meant something and a person's word was their bond. Richard's old lawyer, Arthur Davies. I gave her the email address from memory, one I hadn't used in a decade. We crafted the email together. Simple. Urgent. Arthur, it's Elizabeth Sterling. I need your help. Please review the attached. It concerns Richard's estate. We hit send. The silence in the room was deafening. It felt like we had just launched a missile and were waiting for it to hit its target. An hour felt like a lifetime. 2 hours felt like an eternity. Then my phone rang. The screen displayed an unknown number. I answered, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Hello, Elizabeth. It's Arthur Davies. My God, Elizabeth. What in the hell is this document? His voice wasn't the calm, measured tone of a seasoned lawyer. It was sputtering, incandescent, with a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. It's exactly what it looks like. Arthur, I said quietly. This isn't a document. It's a moral travesty wrapped in legal jargon. This is predatory. It's unconscionable. I could hear him pacing the sound, faint over the line. They're citing his emotional wellness. They're framing a parental abandonment as a therapeutic necessity. Who drafted this? A vulture with a law degree. A man named Dr. Alistair Finch, apparently. Maya whispered from beside me. I repeated the name to Arthur. A disgusted noise came from the other end. Finch? Of course. I've heard whispers about this charlatan. The Ultimate Self Institute. It's a cult, Elizabeth, a high-priced cult that preys on the weak-willed and convinces them that cutting off their families is a form of enlightenment. They called it the final severance, I said. Arthur swore a short, sharp curse. The language is deliberate. It's designed to be psychologically coercive. And legally, Elizabeth, it's drafted to be ironclad. They've used every loophole. They've framed it as a voluntary agreement to protect Ethan's mental state, making it incredibly difficult to challenge on grounds of duress, because the very act of you fighting it would be used as proof that you are the source of his trauma. My blood ran cold. So it's hopeless. No, he said, and his voice was no longer sputtering. It was the voice of a fighter. It was cold steel. It is not hopeless. It is an outrage. And I will be damned if I let Richard's son and that snake he married do this to you. We are going to fight this, Elizabeth. We are going to dismantle this brick by brick. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told him about the whispers, the changing house, the aura recordings, the divorce your mother conversation. With every word I spoke, I felt the shard of ice in my chest grow. But it was no longer just a source of pain. It was a weapon. Our strategy session with Arthur, conducted over a secure video call, was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. He sat in a book-lined office that smelled of old paper and integrity, while Maya and I huddled in my chintz-draped bedroom. Legally, a direct assault is what they expect. Arthur explained, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. We would file a motion to have the contract voided on the grounds of undue influence and emotional coercion. They would counter with a team of Finch's psychologists, painting you as a manipulative, narcissistic mother, and Ethan as the victim finally breaking free. It would be a he said, she said battle in a courtroom, and it would get ugly, expensive, and public. And given the way this is written, we are not guaranteed to win. So we lose, Maya asked, her voice small. No, Arthur said, a grim smile touching his lips. We don't play their game. We change the battlefield. They are using the modern language of therapy and wellness to commit a classic old-fashioned sin, greed and cruelty. They are using private tools to isolate you. So we will use public tools to protect you. He looked directly at me through the screen. Elizabeth, they have tried to erase your identity. The first step in our fight is to build you a new one, a stronger one, an undeniable one. I didn't understand. What are you talking about? It was Maya who answered, her eyes gleaming with sudden, brilliant understanding. He's talking about the narrative. They control the narrative inside this house. We need to control the narrative outside of it. The plan was audacious. It was terrifying. And it was perfect. They had used technology to wall me in. I would use it to break free. Arthur would handle the quiet, behind-the-scenes legal preparations, filing preliminary paperwork that would bog them down in bureaucracy should they try to force my hand. He was laying the legal mines. Maya and I, we were in charge of public relations. We were going to build a fortress of goodwill so strong that Chloe's accusations would shatter against it like glass. That evening, we launched Graham's Garden. The name was Maya's idea. It was perfect, wholesome, gentle. Everything Chloe claimed I was not. Maya, my brilliant, tech-savvy general, set up the accounts, a TikTok, an Instagram, a Facebook page. Our first video was painfully simple. Maya filmed me on her phone, propped up on a stack of books on the garden table. I was just tending my roses, the ones Richard had always claimed were too much trouble. "Hello there," I said, looking into the tiny lens, feeling foolish. I don't really know what I'm doing, but my granddaughter Maya said this might be fun. I snipped a wilting bloom from a bush. These are my Queen Elizabeth roses. A bit old-fashioned, I suppose, but they're resilient. They always come back, no matter the winter. I smiled a real smile this time. They remind me to be resilient too. Maya added some soft instrumental music and posted it. It got 12 views. We kept going. The next day, I baked an apple pie. Not Richard's favourite, my favourite. The one with extra cinnamon and a lattice crust he always said was too fussy. Maya filmed my wrinkled hands kneading the dough, the steam rising as it came out of the oven. I didn't offer any profound wisdom. I just talked. "There's a secret to a good crust," I said to the camera, my voice warm. "It's cold butter and not overworking the dough. Sometimes the less you meddle with things, the better they turn out." That video got 100 views, then 1,000. The comments started to trickle in. "You remind me of my own grandma. I miss her so much. That pie looks amazing recipe. There is something so calming about watching you bake." We found our rhythm. I would do what I had always done in the quiet moments of my life. I gardened. I baked. I knitted. I read poetry aloud on the porch swing. Maya was my director, my producer, my one-woman film crew. She had an artist's eye catching the golden light of the late afternoon as it filtered through the leaves, focusing on the detail of a stitch on a knitted blanket, the shimmer of dew on a spider's web. The content was authentic because it was real. I never once mentioned my children, my home, my gilded cage. I never spoke of my grief or my fear. I just shared small, quiet pieces of my life. I became a character, Gram, the gentle, wise, kind-hearted grandmother of the internet. Chloe and Ethan were completely oblivious. Once Ethan saw me on the porch talking to Maya's phone, which was propped on the railing. "What are you doing, Mum?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "Oh, just a silly little thing Maya set up," I said, waving a dismissive hand. "She's teaching her old grandmother about the TikToks. It passes the time." He just shook his head and walked away, a small, pitying smile on his face. Let him think I was a doddering old woman with a foolish hobby. His condescension was my camouflage. The account grew. First, it was just people in our town, Maple Creek. The comments became more personal. "Is that Gram from Gram's Garden? I saw you at the farmer's market." Then the local news blog, the Maple Creek Monitor, sent a message. They wanted to do a feature. Local grandmother becomes unlikely social media star. Maya and I planned the interview carefully. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah, came to the house. We met in the garden, my territory. Chloe and Ethan were out for the day, attending one of Finch's weekend intensives. I was charming. I was humble. I served Sarah a slice of my cinnamon apple pie and told her stories about growing up in Oregon. I talked about the importance of community, of simple joys, of finding new purpose at any age. "You seem to have such a wonderful, supportive family," Sarah said, gesturing vaguely toward the house. I smiled, a carefully constructed expression of gentle melancholy. "I'm very lucky," I said. "My granddaughter Maya is my rock." In life, you learn to cherish the people who truly see you. The article was published the next day. It was syndicated to a larger regional paper. My follower count exploded. I was no longer just a local curiosity. I was becoming a minor phenomenon. The comments section was a tidal wave of love and support. "This woman is a treasure. We must protect her at all costs. She has such a peaceful soul. Her family is so lucky." Gram's Garden for President. I read every single one. They were more than just nice words. They were bricks. They were mortar. I was building a wall around myself, a fortress of public affection. And from inside my gilded cage, Chloe and Ethan had no idea that the world outside was falling in love with the woman they were trying to erase. They thought they were laying a siege, but I was building an army. The ambush was set. All I had to do was spring the trap. The day arrived, with a cold, metallic tang in the air, the sky a flat, unforgiving grey. I felt a tremor in my hands, but it wasn't the feigned fragility of my performance. It was the hum of a high-tension wire, the thrum of impending battle. I picked up the phone. "Chloe?" I said, my voice carefully pitched to sound weary, resigned. "I am ready. Let S talk about the papers this afternoon. Let S just get it over with." The sigh of relief on her end was a gust of wind, carrying with it the scent of victory. "Of course, Elizabeth. That is a very healthy decision. We'll be over around 3. We were so proud of you for taking this step." Proud of me. The words were so obscene, so grotesquely twisted, that they almost made me laugh. They arrived precisely at 3. Smug didn't begin to cover it. They walked into the living room not as family, but as conquerors taking possession of a new territory. Chloe was dressed in a severe, minimalist white tunic, looking like the high priestess of some joyless cult. Ethan trailed in her wake, his face a mask of grim determination. He wouldn't meet my eyes. They sat on the sofa opposite Richard S. armchair, where I had taken my station. They placed the contract on the coffee table between us, a formal declaration of war. Mom Ethan began, his voice stilted, rehearsed. He was reciting a script. "As we've discussed, this is about my journey. It is about healing the generational trauma and establishing the boundaries I need to become my whole authentic self. This isn't a punishment. It's a recalibration of our relationship dynamic." He spoke the words, but they were Chloe S. They were Finch S. Hollow phrases stripped of all human meaning. He was a puppet, and I could see the strings. Chloe gave him an encouraging nod. "What Ethan is saying, Elizabeth, is that for him to truly heal, he needs this separation. Your presence, your energy. It has become a source of dysregulation for him. This act is one of love, the ultimate act of self-love for him, and a chance for you to release him from that emotional burden." I let the silence stretch, watching them. Watching the certainty in Chloe S. eyes, the pained conflict in Ethan S. He was suffering, I could see that. But he had chosen his side. "I see," I said softly. As Ethan opened his mouth to continue his soulless speech, the doorbell rang. A flicker of annoyance crossed Chloe's face. "Are you expecting someone?" "As a matter of fact," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong, all trace of the frail old woman gone. "I am." I watched their faces as the front door opened and Arthur Davies walked into the living room. He was an imposing man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of white hair and eyes that could chip granite. He carried an old leather briefcase that looked as if it had weathered 1,000 battles. He closed the door behind him with a definitive click. Ethan S. jaw went slack. Chloe S. serene mask cracked, revealing the hard, angry face beneath. "Who are you?" she demanded. "This is a private family matter." Arthur ignored her. He walked over to my chair and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of pure, unwavering solidarity. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Are you all right? I am now Arthur," I replied. He turned his gaze upon Chloe and Ethan, and it was withering. "Arthur Davies," he announced. "I am Mrs. Sterling S., legal counsel, and I have some questions about this contract." He said the word as if it were something foul he had scraped off his shoe. Colour flooded Chloe's cheeks. "She doesn't need a lawyer. This is a therapeutic agreement, not a legal dispute. Anything that seeks to permanently sever a mother's legal and familial rights for financial and real estate gain is a legal dispute." Ms. Vance Arthur said, his voice dripping with contempt. "And I find its premise to be morally and ethically bankrupt." "You don't understand," Chloe shot back, her voice rising. She was losing control, her carefully constructed calm shattering. "You don't know the work Dr. Finch does. You don't understand the wounds Ethan has carried his whole life. This is about liberation, not money. Ah, yes, Dr. Finch, Arthur said, nodding slowly. The man who charges $20,000 for a severance package. How very liberating. He needs this, Chloe shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is the source. She is a poison he has to get out of his system. Her codependency, her passive aggression, her narcissistic needs. As her tirade escalated, I calmly reached for my phone on the side table. I didn't look at it. My eyes were locked on hers. I pressed a single button on the screen. From the Aura Smart Hub on the mantelpiece, a voice filled the room. A voice that was crisp, clear, and chillingly familiar. It was Chloe S.'s voice. It is absolutely essential, for his own soul, for his own progress. It is time to divorce your mother. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound from the room. Ethan stared at the speaker, as if he had seen a ghost. His face, already pale, turned a sickly ashen grey. I pressed the button again. Another recording played. This one was of Ethan, his voice hesitant, full of doubt. I don't know, Chloe. Divorce my mother? It sounds monstrous. And then Chloe S. replies, sharp and impatient. Don't be sentimental, Ethan. It is just a word. Finch calls it a final severance. It is a procedure. It is clean. It is necessary. Are you going to let her hold you back your entire life? I played another and another. A curated collection of their conspiracy. Their voices plotting my erasure echoed in the room where I had raised my son. Each word was a hammer blow. Ethan made a choked, guttural sound. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. He was broken. But Chloe was something else. Her face was a mask of pure fury. The last vestige of her enlightened persona had been incinerated, leaving only rage. You see, she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. You see what she does? She twists things. She manipulates. This is exactly why he needs to be free of you. You are a sickness, a poison. She lunged to her feet, her body taut with aggression. For a moment, I thought she might strike me. But I didn't flinch. The frail old woman was long gone. The ice in my chest was my shield. I just watched her, my expression unreadable. I let her scream. I let her condemn herself with her own venom. As Chloe's furious tirade reached its crescendo, her face contorted with a rage that had nothing to do with healing. I let my gaze drift past her. I looked calmly towards the bookshelf, to the small, discreet black box nestled between a collection of poetry and a ceramic bird. A tiny pinprick of green light glowed on its surface. I let her finish her final, desperate accusation. You have done this to him, hanging in the poisoned air between us. Then I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. Thank you for your honesty, Chloe. I said, my tone even almost conversational. I am sure the members of the Maple Creek Community Board and Mr. Henderson, the investigative reporter from the Oregonian, appreciate your candor. I tilted my head toward the webcam. They are all watching this live stream, you see. The transformation was instantaneous. The rage on Chloe S.'s face didn't just fade. It collapsed, imploding into a new expression. Raw, primal panic. Her eyes darted from my face to the bookshelf, finally registering the small, innocuous device. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from her face, leaving her a ghastly white, a perfect match for her tunic. I arranged a little session on a topic I've become intimately familiar with. I explained to the camera and to the room the financial and psychological abuse of the elderly. I felt a live demonstration would be most effective. Ethan lifted his head from his hands, his tear-streaked face a canvas of utter confusion and horror. He stared at me as if he'd never seen me before. He was right. He hadn't he? But that I said, my voice dropping, taking on a new weight of sorrow, is not the final exhibit. Arthur on cue stepped forward. He placed a heavy, worn leather book on the coffee table. It landed with a soft, final thud. The pages were yellowed, the cover scarred with age. "What is that?" Chloe whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "My husband, Richard S. Diary," I said, and for the first time a genuine tremor entered my voice. This was not an act. This was the opening of a wound I had carried unspoken for most of my life. Arthur opened the book to a page marked with a red ribbon. "If I may," he said, his voice resonating with a solemn gravity. He began to read. Entry June 12th, 1995. Elizabeth was offered the part-time curator position at the university today. An excellent opportunity. I told her I didn't think it was a good idea. I told her Ethan was at a sensitive age, that he needed his mother at home. He would feel abandoned. She, of course, agreed immediately. Her devotion is her weakness. The truth is, I cannot abide the thought of her having a life outside of these walls, a world that does not revolve around me. I need her here, under my watch. A strangled noise escaped Ethan's throat. I didn't look at him. I looked at the diary. Arthur turned a few dozen pages. Entry May 3rd, 2010. Planted another seed of doubt in Ethan S. mind about his mother's competence with finances. Told him she was getting forgetful, that he would need to be prepared to take over for her one day. It is for the best. He is so pliable, so desperate for my approval. He will always choose me. It ensures that when I am gone, my will, my control will remain. She will always be alone except for the legacy of my protection, my own protection, the cage he had built for me. Arthur looked up, his eyes filled with a quiet, profound sadness. "It goes on like this," he said softly, "for 30 years, page after page. A detailed, systematic campaign to isolate Elizabeth from her friends, her career, and ultimately from her own son." I finally turned my gaze to Ethan. His face was a ruin. The carefully constructed world he had built with Chloe and Dr. Finch had been leveled, and in its place was a crater, a smoking pit of lies. The wounds he was trying to heal, the trauma he was trying to escape, it wasn't from me. It was from the father he had worshipped, the man who had molded him into a weapon to be used against his own mother. The ultimate betrayal wasn't yours, Chloe. I said, my voice thick with the unshed tears of decades. It was his. I pointed to the diary, to the ghost of my husband that filled the room. The control he craved was so absolute, it had to reach beyond the grave. You didn't create the weapon that was aimed at my heart. I looked from Chloe's horrified face to Ethan's shattered one. You just found it in the armory he left behind, and you pulled the trigger. The silence that fell after I hit end stream was louder than any of Chloe's therapeutic jargon. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the living room. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. Ethan's face was a mask of shattered glass, his features fragmented by disbelief. Chloe, however, was pure, unyielding granite. Her jaw was set, her eyes burning with a fury that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with being exposed. Arthur Davies, bless his stoic legal heart, was the first to break the spell. He simply cleared his throat, a small, dry sound that seemed to cut through the tension like a razor. "Well," he said, looking from Ethan to Chloe, his gaze lingering on her with undisguised contempt. "I believe the term is checkmate." Chloe's composure finally cracked, not with tears, but with a sharp, venomous hiss. "You think this is over, you senile old woman. You have no idea what you've done. You've just confirmed to Ethan, to the world, how toxic you truly are. A mother who would do this to her own son. A mother who would save him. I said, my voice quiet, but firm. It didn't waver. The trembling was gone. From you. And from a ghost he's been chasing his whole life. I gestured toward Richard S. Diary still sitting on the coffee table. The final damning piece of evidence. Ethan finally made a sound. It was a low, wounded noise like an animal caught in a trap. He looked at the diary, then at me, then at Chloe. Chloe. What? What is she talking about, my father? Don T listened to her. Ethan Chloe snapped, grabbing his arm. It is a performance. It is manipulation. Cannot you see? This is a classic narcissist gambit. She's creating a new narrative to make herself the victim. But the spell was broken. The words which once held so much power over him now sounded like what they were hollow, rehearsed scripts. He pulled his arm away from her, a small but seismic movement. My phone! Maya said, her voice a hushed whisper beside me. She held up her screen. Grandma, it's everywhere. And it was. The local news Facebook page had shared the link. Then a regional one. Comments were flooding in a tidal wave of digital shock and outrage. The live stream viewer count, which had been in the hundreds, had exploded posthumously. The recording was being shared, clipped, remixed. My face, looking tired but resolute, was becoming a meme, a symbol. Arthur stepped forward. I would advise you both. He said, his voice dropping into a register that tolerated no argument, to leave this property immediately. You are no longer welcome here. Any attempt to contact Elizabeth will be considered harassment. A restraining order is already being drafted. As for the contract. He picked up the vile document from the table with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. This will make a fascinating exhibit in several upcoming legal proceedings. Chloe's eyes narrowed. You can do this. Oh, I assure you I can, Arthur replied. And I will. Ethan didn't seem to hear him. He was just staring at me, his eyes pleading. Mom? I couldn't look at him. Not then. I just shook my head, a slow, painful gesture. Go, Ethan. Just go. He stumbled out, not with the confident stride of a man on a healing journey, but with the shuffling gait of a lost child. Chloe shot me one last look of pure hatred before following him, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the hardwood floors. The front door slammed shut, and the silence that returned was different. It wasn't a vacuum anymore. It was clean. It was the sound of air rushing into a space that had been suffocating for far too long. The days that followed were a blur, a storm I watched from the calm eye of my own living room. Maya became my press secretary, my digital shield. She curated the internet for me, showing me the important things, filtering out the noise. The story didn't just go viral. It went supernova. It was on morning talk shows, dissected on late-night news panels. My little live stream, filmed on a cheap webcam propped on a stack of books, had become a national conversation. Hashtags bloomed like toxic algae. Final severance. Sovereign self-scam. Divorce your parents. But then another one started to trend, one that brought a lump to my throat. Stand with Elizabeth. People posted pictures of their own mothers, their grandmothers. They shared stories of subtle family coercion, of pop psychology gone wrong, of feeling alienated by the very people who were supposed to love them. My private war had become a public rallying cry. Look at this, Grandma Maya said one afternoon, her laptop glowing in the dimming light. She pointed to a headline from a major news outlet. The Sovereign Self-Institute Healing, or High Control Group Feds launch investigation. The article detailed how dozens of former students had come forward since my live stream. They told stories of financial ruin, of families torn apart, of being instructed to cut off anyone who didn't to conform to Dr. Finch's ideology. His empire, built on preying on the vulnerable, was crumbling. A week later, we saw the footage Dr. Alastair Finch, the man who had branded me a primary source of trauma, being led from his gleaming headquarters in handcuffs, his face pale and slack with shock. He wasn't a guru. He was just a con man. Chloe and Ethan became ghosts in our town. Their faces were recognizable to everyone. A local teenager posted a TikTok of Chloe being screamed at in the grocery store, her cart filled with organic kale and kombucha, as she was called a monster. She abandoned the cart and fled. Another post showed Ethan's car, a pristine electric SUV with the words, "Call your mother," scrawled in the dust on its rear window. They were pariahs trapped in a prison of their own making. The community that I had nurtured with my garden, my baked goods, my quiet presence, had risen to my defense in a way I could never have orchestrated. They had chosen a side. I knew he would come. It was inevitable. It was about 3 weeks after the live stream. The digital storm had quieted to a steady rain of think pieces and podcast episodes. I was in the garden, my hands in the dirt, pruning the roses Richard had loved, when I heard the back gate creak open. It was Ethan. He looked erased. The sharp, confident lines of his face had dissolved. His clothes, usually so perfectly curated, were rumpled. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He just stood there on the edge of the patio, a ghost, in his own childhood backyard. "Mom," he whispered. The word was heavy, rusty from disuse. I didn't stop my work. I snipped a dead rose head from its stem. The snap of the shears was loud in the quiet afternoon. "Ethan?" He took a hesitant step forward. I saw the news. About Finch. They were calling it a cult. That's what it was, I said, my voice flat. I refused to give him the comfort of an argument, of a discussion. The time for that was long past. I didn't know, he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I swear, Mum." Chloe. She was so convinced. He was so convincing. He used all these words, he had studies, he made it all sound so logical. He said it was the only way I could ever be whole. He said you were the source of the wound. The one my father? He trailed off, gesturing vaguely, unable to articulate the poison he'd so readily swallowed. "The wound your father gave you, I finished for him," finally turning to look at him. I held his gaze. "The wound he gave us both." Tears began to stream down his face, silent and wretched. I read the articles, the ones about Dad's diary. They published excerpts. He choked on a sob. "All those years. He told me you were fragile. He said I had to be strong for you both because you couldn't handle things. He said, you were the reason he was so stressed, the reason he worked so hard. He made me his confidant, his little soldier." "And you believed him," I said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact, a cold, hard, 40-year-old fact. I was a child," he cried, his voice rising in desperation. And then Chloe came along, and it was like she was speaking the same language, but with new words. She just put a name to all the things he had made me feel. It all fit. It was a perfect story. And I was the hero who was finally going to save himself. He sank to his knees on the stone patio, his hands covering his face. His shoulders shook with gut-wrenching sobs. It was the sound I had dreaded and longed for my entire life, the sound of my son finally breaking. But I felt nothing. Not joy. Not vindication. Just a vast, empty ache in the center of my chest. The space where a mother's love for her son used to be. It had been eroded systematically, first by his father, and then by his wife, and finally by himself. He looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and regret. "Please, Mum. Please forgive me. Chloe's gone. She left last week, packed her bags, and said she needed to sever from my toxic family drama. She is gone. It is just me. We can fix this. I can fix this. I'll go to real therapy. I'll do anything. I looked at this weeping man on my patio, this stranger who wore my son's face. And I knew what I had to do, the final necessary cut. I walked over to him, but I didn't reach out. I didn't offer a hand. I stood over him, my shadow falling across his bowed head. You came to my house with a contract, Ethan, I said, and my voice was as calm and as cold as deep water. You and your wife. You wanted to legally erase me from your life. You wanted to declare our relationship null and void. It was a mistake, a terrible. No, I interrupted. It was a choice. You are a grown man. You made a choice. You looked at 45 years of motherhood, of scraped knees and bedtime stories and birthday cakes and parent-teacher conferences, and you decided it was all toxic material to be disposed of. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Mom, please. You wanted a divorce. Ethan, I said the words falling like stones into a well. There was no anger in my voice. There was no hatred. There was only a profound and bottomless sadness for the little boy I had lost so long ago. You have it. He stared at me, his tear-filled eyes wide with incomprehension. What? I took a deep breath, the air smelling of cut roses and damp earth. I am divorcing you, for my own health, for my own sanity, for my own survival. This us. It is over. The final severance. You got what you wanted. It was the hardest, most necessary sentence I have ever spoken. It was the sound of a cage door swinging shut, but this time I was on the outside. I turned my back on him, then on the sound of my son's heart breaking on the patio stones, and I walked back into my empty, silent, and finally blessedly free house. I sold the house in Maple Creek a month later. It sold quickly in the overheated market of 2025 to a young family from the city looking for a yard and good schools. They gushed about the garden, the beautiful flowers, the deep roots. I just smiled. They had no idea those roots were tangled around 40 years of pain. The process of packing was an excavation. Every object held a memory, and I had to decide which ones to keep. I found old photo albums, pictures of a smiling young woman who slowly faded, her smile becoming tighter, more brittle over the years. I found Ethan's first-grade drawings, a smiling stick figure of me holding his hand. I put them all in a box, not to keep, but for the estate lawyer to handle. They belonged to a life that was no longer mine. The one thing I did keep was Richard's diary. I packed it at the bottom of a box of books, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the prettiest cages are still cages, a reminder that control can disguise itself as care, that poison can be administered in slow, sweet doses over decades, a reminder of what I had survived. The last day I walked through the empty rooms, the echo of my footsteps was the only sound. Aura was gone. Its wires pulled from the walls, its digital eyes blinded forever. The walls were bare with pale rectangles where our family photos used to hang. It didn't feel sad. It felt clean. I locked the front door for the last time and didn't look back. With the money from the sale, a sum that felt like reparations, Maya and I moved. We left the suffocating quiet of the suburbs behind and drove toward the sea. We found a small, bright apartment in a city I'd never been to, a place with no history for me. It was on the third floor of a pre-war building with rattling windows and slightly crooked floors. There are no smart hubs here, no digital assistants listening to every word, just open windows and the constant rhythmic sound of the waves crashing on the shore a few blocks away. It is the most soothing sound in the world. My story took on a life of its own. It became a strange kind of internet folklore. Maya would sometimes read me bits and pieces. There were threads on Reddit SMI, the arsehole forum, debating every move I made. There were long-form essays on feminist websites about psychological abuse and familial enmeshment. A popular true crime podcast did a two-part episode called The Maple Creek Severance, using clips from my livestream. I became a cautionary tale, a boogeyman for manipulative wellness gurus, a hero for women who felt trapped in their own quiet, gilded cages. I lost my son. There is no easy way to say it. He is a casualty of a war that was started long before he was even born, a war waged in whispers and control by his own father. I hear whispers about him sometimes through old neighbors, that he's living alone, working a menial job, a hollowed-out man. There is a part of me, a deep, primal mother part, that aches at this. But then I remember the contract. I remember the coldness in his eyes. And I know that my divorce was an act of survival. I had to amputate the limb to save the body. But this isn't a story about loss. Not really. It is a story about reclamation. This morning, the sun streamed into our new kitchen, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The whole apartment smells of salt and coffee. Maya is at the counter, her laptop open, but she's watching me. I'm teaching her how to bake. Not Richard Eats' favourite apple pie with its fussy, overworked crust and cloyingly sweet filling. No, we were making a lemon and rosemary tart, a new recipe. Our recipe. I show her how to press the dough into the pan, my gnarled fingers guiding her young, capable ones. She gets a smudge of flour on her nose and laughs a bright, beautiful sound that fills the small kitchen. It's a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. It is the sound of a future being built, not a past being mourned. In the quiet morning light of my new kitchen, watching my granddaughter laugh, I know that I finally won. The victory wasn't tea in the live stream. It wasn't tea in the downfall of Dr. Finch or the exile of Chloe. It wasn't tea even in getting my house back. The real victory is this moment, this peace, this freedom. I didn't just save myself from the gilded cage. I finally, after 75 long years, found myself. And she is stronger than I ever imagined.